Welcome to Fireside Chats, where we speak with Canadian physician entrepreneurs about their journey and experiences in medical innovation. This series is brought to you by the Physician Innovator Network, and I'm your host, Anurag Dalai. Hey guys, for those of you joining a little bit later, I'm Anu. I'm one of the radiology residents in Saskatoon. Joined Physician Innovator last summer and been helping out with the Fireside Chat series ever since. And we host an event pretty much every month. And this month we got Dr. Breanne Everett. So I'm just going to expand on the introduction, explain a little bit more about her background, and then we'll get into the conversation. So Dr. Breanne Everett is the CEO, president, and co-founder of Orpyx Medical Technologies, Inc., or Orpyx for short, which focuses on creating medical-grade wearable technologies with unique pressure sensors used to prevent conditions such as diabetic peripheral neuropathy and even aid in athletic performance. Dr. Everett was awarded the Governor General's Innovation Award in 2016 for her work at Orpyx, in addition to being named one of Avenue Magazine's top 40 under 40, one of top 100 most powerful women in Canada, and the University of Calgary's graduate of the last decade in 2014. Dr. Everett is a Loran Scholar, as well as a member of the CMA Joule's Innovation Council, the Governor General Innovation Award Assessment Committee, and the Rideau Hall Innovation Advisory Council. Dr. Everett is also a resident physician in plastic and reconstructive surgery at the University of Calgary. And when she's not busy building the future, she loves to spend time with her family. So Dr. Everett, welcome to Fireside Chats.
Thanks for having me. So happy to be here.
That's awesome. I know we're chatting a little bit about crypto and stuff, and I kind of want to go straight into that, but we'll leave that for a little bit later. So just to get started off, can you tell us a bit about yourself and how you got into healthcare innovation?
For sure. Yeah, so I think it certainly wasn't something that I was really planning on doing when I first started medicine. So I think I've always been an entrepreneur at heart. I was starting businesses as a kid, and I think that I assumed that I wouldn't be doing it again, but it just sort of happened. So I did my MD at the University of Calgary, and then I started my residency in plastic and reconstructive surgery. And in that initial portion of my training, as with all of the incoming residents, we had to find a research project that we would either do for that first year. We were expected to be producing outputs from our research over the course of the entire program. So we could either do sort of a project every year or do something that was more longitudinal. And at the time, I became really interested in the area of medical devices, medical device design and development. And then also had been kind of in parallel to that, becoming really interested in an area of sensory substitution. So I'd been reading about use of technologies in people who are blind and basically taking in visual information and transposing that to another part of the body. So people who had lost sensation in one way could be taking it in another way. And there was a clear parallel in that, and nothing had really ever made it mainstream in the area of sensory substitution. Like a bunch of devices had been designed, developed in basically prototype phases, and tested with really early promising results, but nothing had really made it to the fore. And in my own world within plastic surgery, I think this is kind of the case with anybody in medicine. You're always looking at ways that patient care can be improved or the system can be improved. Like healthcare itself is so vast that there's so many areas for opportunity in improvement. And within plastics, and one of those areas was the care of people with diabetic foot disease. And there was this parallel that I was drawing between use of sensory substitution in people who are blind and the potential use of that technology in people who have lost feeling in their feet as a result of diabetes. So I had started having some ideas around what could we do to better improve the lives of people living with diabetes with some sort of sensory-based solution. And you have to think this was like 2010. So I was even considering the possibility of a wired system, which in retrospect is sort of hilarious. That would never fly. But the concept of basically taking in sensory data from the foot and somehow providing that direct feedback in another way to the patient, or providing action-based feedback to prevent pressure injury and ulceration in people living with the disease was sort of the initial concept. And I had approached my residency research director at the time with the proposal to basically take on the idea of development of a medical device and have that be my research project. Thinking that I could just do this alongside my residency program and kind of balance the two, no problem. So I got a lot of support from that early on, support from the program in general, and started being introduced to people within the local ecosystem in medical device development and consumer electronics development. And one thing led to the other, and I was strongly encouraged by those mentors to start a company and not view this as a research project. That if I really actually wanted this to get into the shoes of people who needed a technology like this, I really needed to actually have a company with a dedicated focus, use that company to do what the company would be best for in terms of iterating and developing and translating knowledge, and then utilize the academic world for research. And so I was pretty uncomfortable with the idea of starting a company at that time, because I really just wanted to improve patient care, and it felt at the time just starting a company felt like a really dirty word, and so I kind of just ended up taking the advice of my mentors and taking the plunge, starting the company. I did that I started the company in 2010, so it was incorporated in May 2010, and for about a year and a bit, tried to balance running a startup, getting the foundations for a startup and intellectual property in place while doing a surgical residency, and realized that was actually impossible to do either well. And so I decided in 2011 to take a step away, and I did an MBA for 2 years, so 2011 to 2013. I really had no formal training or really even experiential training in business. And so did that for 2 years, learned a ton from the program and from my colleagues. It was an executive program, so people who were really experienced in business. And then from at 2013, when I expected to have sold the company and I could just go back to my residency and focus on being a surgeon, it was very clear that there was more to this. It was like, basically I had a child. That was the company, and it needed to be supported, and it needed to grow. And basically from 2013 onwards, I've just sequentially delayed going back to residency and continued to grow the company to where it's at today. So that was sort of how I accidentally started a company. It was really focused on trying to actually improve a portion of medicine and realizing that it's not something that can be taken lightly. It's like, you're in it. Once you started it, you're in it.
That's so cool. I gotta ask, what kind of businesses were you starting when you were a kid?
Oh, I had a lot of businesses. Never paid any taxes on those businesses. I'll be fully transparent. I painted and sold rocks for a little while. We had some very, very impressive lemonade stands. So we would bring in about $600 per weekend. And
oh, wow.
It was a full thing. And then when I was 8, I started a jewelry business. So I started, it started with more like beading, just sort of general, like simple beading. And then I started taking some courses in silversmithing, and then ended up selling the creations that I was making to a number of film productions and made for TV movies and TV shows. So I was producing jewelry for a TV show that was on North of 60 at the time called, on CBC called North of 60. So I was producing jewelry for that company for a number of years.
Wow, that's so cool. That sounds like a productive childhood. I was mostly playing video games. should have started a business. That'd have been cool.
Actually, you mentioned, video games is actually very productive now for innovating. So I don't know.
Yeah, totally. Hey, yeah, I wish you should tell my parents that. I mean, they didn't have the same view, but you mentioned like starting a company around 2010 and 2013 when you eventually took the plunge. You said it was kind of considered like a dirty word or concept to do. Can you expand a bit about what you mean by that?
Yeah, and I don't think this was anything that like there was nothing ever that was specifically told to me that made me feel that way. But I just very much viewed medicine as this like sort of pure discipline that 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 was very distinct from business and innovation. And it kind of I kind of went into it with this I guess expectation that you couldn't improve patient care and also have a profit at the end of the day, which I actually think is wrong. But in now, like with where I've evolved to in my thinking on this, but I just had this expectation that there was a very clear line there, and that in order to be as focused as possible on the best patient care, you wouldn't cross that line.
Interesting. Okay, and have you seen that concept or that mentality change over the course of your time at Orpyx, where you see kind of the broader medical innovation community? Has that kind of changed, or are there still remnants of that thinking?
Yeah, I think so. I think I was very surprised early on at how much support I was getting for doing this, because my expectation was that it would be viewed in that way, and it generally wasn't. The people that were in my close network, including the program director and the research director at the time, were really supportive. My immediate friends and family were all very supportive. I didn't really have any examples of other people who had done it before, so that also made it hard, where it wasn't like I couldn't point to somebody who had kind of been there. So that was difficult, but I think over that period of time, it's basically been a decade. There's been a huge evolution in I think general thinking around physician innovation. There's like this program itself is a great example of this kind of groundswell of support and interest in physician innovation. There are programs being put on through CMA and Joule to continue to support physician-led innovation, and really, like, who better to innovate than the people within the system? Like, they see the problems, they understand the size of problems relative to one another. And I think that to have healthcare providers think like owners within the system, you actually need to move innovation into the system. Otherwise, where does anything go? You can't expect external people who are not stakeholders within healthcare to actually be the force of change. So my perspective on that has evolved entirely. Like I feel very, very strongly about it now.
That's cool. And thanks for sharing. And coming back to Orpyx, you kind of laid the or shared the foundation of how Orpyx kind of came to be. Kind of the idea where you took this sensory idea from people who had blindness and maybe thinking of how that technology can be used for patients with diabetic peripheral neuropathy, specifically with their feet. Hopefully wireless technology, as you eventually used. Can you talk us a little bit about your first experience in starting Orpyx, like the hiring, the funding, the strategizing, all that kind of stuff? Especially, again, if you can sort out the timeline for us, was this kind of pre-MBA, post-MBA? How did it all come together?
Yeah. So, I mean, early on, it was like 3 employees. So myself and one of the other co-founders, who's an engineer and he's still with the company, and a head of marketing and business development. So we hired somebody into marketing before we had a product to sell. So that was something where, I over the course of this entire initiative, I've had to kind of learn on the spot for absolutely everything, from figuring out how to start a company, run a company, develop an idea, develop a product, grow a team. And there are so many aspects to starting a business that if you haven't done it before, it's hard to, it's like, if I were to go back and look at the initial business plan that I created, it would be hysterical at this point, I'm sure. I haven't done that in a while, but I think that what has been important here is not that it isn't that I knew everything or even close to everything from the very beginning, because even if you know how to run a business, everything evolves and you have to be ready to adapt and change on the fly. But I think it's been large, like the ability to get to where we're at is, and it's not just me, it's everybody who's part of the team, that willingness to learn, adapt, and change, and continue to change your perspective on things with new information, and it just evolve your thinking along everything. So in terms of hiring, and this is something that I'm still doing, like trying to figure out who to hire and when. I've been more recently going through exercises of looking at the org chart as it sits today, and then trying to think about where we're going in the next 6 and 12 months, and figuring out who we need for that, and actually kind of like building an org chart forward and then also building it backward, because sometimes you hire differently if you start to think about where a company needs to be a year from now, and growing it in a very metered way. So like thinking about it as a tree where you have these different branches that are sprouting off, and those branches grow. I need to make sure that the foundation for those branches is very strong. But I feel like no matter what projections you set, they're always wrong. But how wrong and how quickly are you going to respond to that change is really the key. Like it comes down to adaptability and being open to new information.
Totally. Yeah, I think previous guests has kind of been trial by fire and just continual iteration, especially when you have no experience. Like when you're first getting into it, you just have to be open. You have to be extremely flexible. Mm-hmm. But if you enjoy it, I'm sure it's a pretty thrilling learning experience, though. I think earlier you mentioned you had some mentors that you relied on, and you got some good support. How would you encourage or advise folks who are trying to get into medical innovation to seek out mentors, and how do you gauge how to find a good mentor for whatever you're trying to pursue? Like, how did that work for you? And if there's any advice you would impart on someone who is looking for a mentor?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the key is understanding that you're not going to find a single mentor. Mentorship comes in all shapes and forms, and you have to seek out mentorship in different domains and not really expect things from people. So just try to find those mentors all over the place. And it was a lot harder to do this early on in starting the company, because like there's been a huge evolution even of the internet and what's available and how you can connect with people over that period of time. I use LinkedIn all the time now for trying to find new people, connect with new people. The amount of information and knowledge you can gain from the internet now is just like, it doesn't even compare to 10 years from now. Like you can find people that are, you choose any Venn diagram and the intersection in like two very seemingly disparate areas, you can find experts on it. And so it comes down to figuring out where your gaps are, understanding like when you go into a particular situation, what is it that you don't know? What is it that you don't even know that you don't know? And trying to find people within your network that can help you become educated faster in those spaces and fill those gaps. So then as soon as you fill those gaps, you realize that new gaps exist. And the more you know, the less you think you know. And so it's this kind of constant search for people that can help you with that. Even with a single conversation, just filling those gaps. But yeah, my reliance on LinkedIn and figuring that out is very high. One of the other things that I do is I think about other parallel companies that I think who are doing things well, and I'll just go into like I'll look at who's employed through LinkedIn in those organizations and try to understand what the skill sets are of those people involved, and try to figure out where are the gaps in my knowledge, where are my blind spots, and start to fill that out. And it really isn't about copying other companies, but like if you're not at least even on par, you're lost. So yeah, it's just about gap identification and filling those gaps as quickly as possible.
And I guess when you work with the team, it's everyone's kind of doing their own soul searching at their own speeds and their own expertise, but you guys also have to work as a team. So have you gone any, how do you guys work as a team when you're looking to fill those gaps? Do you guys have, what kind of conversations do you guys have at Orpyx or elsewhere?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so that exercise I was talking about trying to imagine how an org structure grows, is something that we do. We do kind of organization wide. It's not just me doing that. So I work with the rest of the leadership team, and I ask them to do that for their own areas, and we kind of work on sort of a harmonized model that considers the whole picture. But I really want everyone to be thinking in that way, like, how do I get from where I am today to where we expect to be a year from now, or 3 years from now, or beyond? And it's amazing, like this type of growth doesn't happen by accident. Like you have to be thinking every step of the way and trying to predict as best as possible, but then also change based on new information. So it really is about like everyone being part of that process. There's a lot of collaborative decision making.
For sure, I can imagine. It's a team sport, medical innovation, so you need a big team to go a long way.
Mm-hmm.
And you touched upon this next topic a little bit when you're kind of talking about how things have kind of been changing over the course of your experience and journey from 2010 and onwards, now 2021. And just to build upon that, like what's been your experience with the receptiveness of physician entrepreneurship amongst various different stakeholders, like colleagues, other residents, staff, hospital administration, folks outside the healthcare industry, venture capital, all that kind of stuff? And has that also kind of changed over time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think so maybe we'll just touch on a couple of those areas. I think just from a healthcare provider perspective, I just increasingly feel like the support is there for physician-led innovation. Again, like early on, it felt like I was sort of a zebra in terms of what I was doing. Like there was it was very rare to find somebody else who had been involved in physician-led innovation. So that was like that was more isolating. And now there's just more and more people, like even through Joule's awards program, it's incredible to see the number of people that are creating their own companies and innovating. And it's not this sort of fringe thing anymore. A lot of people are thinking about it. They want to do both. They want to be involved in clinical medicine, and they also want to be helping to create the future of medicine. Like why wouldn't you? And so that's definitely changed. I think in terms of other stakeholders, like I never felt that there was like a big resistance there. I think that what I've learned is that you need to come to the table with something that makes sense and is like low friction. So early on, like thinking about this as in like a very disruptive model. Like I think I went into it thinking like this needs to be disruptive. And it will be disruptive, but you gotta figure out how to disrupt without doing it in a disruptive way, if that makes sense. So like, how do you actually have this like way to do something better within medicine, but that actually dovetails into current practices so people say yes to doing it? Because if it doesn't look like something they've done before, that's when you get friction. So within Orpyx, that's something that we've continued to evolve this process over time from something that was like, it was like literally a sensor bed that you could see and was like its own device, to basically like merging that into like something that looks exactly like a diabetic custom insole. So, and then you start to dovetail into like the prescription practices around diabetic custom insoles and the reimbursement program and how that goes out. But I think it was a ton of learning for me to figure out that that's how it needed to be deployed, is it couldn't look like something that was totally different, even if it was doing something that was totally different. So that was new. And then on the funding side, I actually think like we struggled for many years to fund this business, and we were just sort of like drip feeding it for a long period of time with friends and family money. And now we don't really need to bring in funding anymore. We're pretty well set independently. And now we're getting approached by investors. And a lot of it, I think, is because we were actually kind of early to remote patient monitoring. Like the concept of remote patient monitoring 10 years ago was very foreign. It was like a little bit too, it wasn't the right time and place for it, but it allowed us to kind of work and iterate and reiterate over that period of time. And now kind of like hit the market when it's hot with a product that has had 10 years of R&D go into it. So funding certainly was a challenge. Now, I don't think it would be an issue if we were actually looking to raise VC funding. But that was like my biggest struggle over the course of the past 10 years was it felt like no one really got what we were trying to do.
And then you get to a point where you might not necessarily need the funding as much, but all of a sudden it's all the funding you have access to all the funding, but it would have been useful to have it back when you really needed it. Hey?
Maybe, but I also look at it and like, you could easily see a situation where somebody really gets it and they fund you in a big way, and then the market's not ready and the well runs dry because you haven't hit enough milestones with that. So it's kind of like, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. I actually, in retrospect, I don't think I would have had it a different way.
Interesting. Yeah, so I think you need a lot of factors to kind of go and be on your side for things to work out.
Oh yeah, ton of luck.
Yeah. Speaking of, you're talking about the past experience of building Orpyx and things like that. Where do you see Orpyx in next year, 5 years, 10 years? Are you guys building different products, or are you just going to keep reiterating on the ones you have now? If you're able to talk about that stuff, that'd be cool.
Yeah. So if you think about the offering as a whole, you basically got this sensory insole system that takes in data from a human, and that data, it comes in the form of pressure sensors, currently pressure sensors, temperature sensors, and an IMU. So we get a very rich data stream coming from the physical device. You then provide actionable based feedback to the user through a mobile app. And then all of that data goes to a cloud-based backend for remote patient monitoring purposes. So our focus initially has been on basically modification of behavior and activity within people living with diabetes to prevent diabetic foot ulcers. I think we've got a lot of work that we can do in terms of just user engagement, UX, UI optimization kind of throughout that offering, even just within the diabetic foot space. But beyond that, we really built this platform to be something that allowed you to measure human movement in the real world. So being able to accurately quantify how someone is interacting with the ground beneath them. And basically almost all human movement is terrestrial. It's based at the level of the foot. So if you can understand how that human is interacting with the ground, you can predict the type of activity they're doing, it's basically quantity and quality of that level of activity. If they're fatiguing, you can look at weight. You can look at weight change over time. You can measure force and power for athletic applications. And so we've coined this basically constellation of sensor data that gives you insights into how somebody's moving as the kinesome. So just like the genome would be representative of your genetic material, the kinesome and all of the sensor data related to somebody's movement gives you that picture of somebody's movement within the world. So as we've developed the platform, we've always been aware of other applications outside of the diabetic foot. So within medicine, perioperative monitoring for people who are having a knee arthroplasty, for example. Or outside of the medical applications, there's a ton of uses in performance optimization and injury prevention, even industrial applications, occupational health and safety. Really anywhere that you want to sort of imperceptibly measure human movement in the real world, you could potentially use the device. So the extension of the company is really around trying to actually start to capture those other spaces. And one of the ways that we're doing that is about a year ago, we spun out a company called Kinetics. Kinetics is actually based on a company that's focused on the development and commercialization of technologies based on that platform that would not be considered FDA regulated. So anything non-medical. So we're starting to now just sort of like fork out into these different areas and start to really robustify what we can do and where we can do it. And actually, so that that one thing that's enabled that is we've really miniaturized the technology. So if you look at it like in an insole, this would be one of the athletic insoles where you have all of that sensing capacity, but it's like super thin. And then we've moved to wireless charging. So there's no need to remove the device from a shoe to be able to charge. You just basically drop a puck in and then it charges wirelessly. So a couple of those hardware innovations that we've made over the last couple of years are really starting to allow more friction-free use kind of across a broad spectrum.
Oh, that's so cool. To see kind of these products grow over time, and I think a lot of us are going to be watching with a lot of intent and excitement as Orpyx and both Kinetic grow. That's so cool. And I'll speak from personal experience. It'd be nice if you guys could make some for soccer cleats. I'm big into soccer, so if I could sneak one of those into a pair, I'm all for it. That'd be pretty cool.
On it.
Yeah, yeah. I'll get the first pre-order. Just remember that. With Orpyx and being a residency and surgical, any residency can be brutal at times, especially a surgical residency, and having a family. How did you balance that, and how were you able to prioritize your time during that time?
So I never had a family and was doing residency at the same time. So I can't take credit for juggling all of those different balls, but I think, at the end of the day, it's really been having a support network. Like my husband, for example, is incredibly supportive, and we are in the partnership. We treat each other as equals. We prioritize each other's business initiatives, and we kind of like have this partnership in terms of like managing the kids in the house. So that without that, and then beyond that, like we've got family that really helps. And when the need arises, like we've got people to lean on, because you really cannot do it by yourself. I have a really strong team that I give autonomy to within the company, and I can trust the decisions that they're making, so I don't have to be everywhere all the time. And then when I went back to the surgical residency and running and doing the startup at the same time, like I really don't think I was doing both well, or either well. Like and looking back on that, I think if I wanted to do this without having to kind of take this separate path in terms of kind of putting a hold on my clinical career, I might have structured and started the company differently. I don't regret what I did, but if I were to provide advice to somebody else who was doing it, I might say to like find a co-founder, basically start a business with two people, somebody that you really trust who can be a partner, and don't be the CEO. Like if you're the CEO, you have to be there all the time. And it's kind of like being a parent versus being a second degree relative. Like if you took on the role of being like a chief medical officer, you're not the one who's expected to be in pitches, shake hands with investors, collect checks with investors, be the one who's driving everything every day all the time. It's like the title actually means a lot in that situation. And if you show up to a meeting and the CEO is not there, how are you going to try to convince somebody that this meeting's important to you? So I think that like depending on somebody's goals, like a lot of people might want to, I think it's actually very valid to do a medical degree and not necessarily ever practice clinical medicine. But if somebody's starting a company, you need to really think about what is your role within that company and how are you going to balance everything, because it is very hard. But in my situation, I think that in order to not require being there every day, it would have been structuring it differently from the get-go.
What would you say is the most difficult part of being an entrepreneur? And is that what you thought would be the most difficult part?
People management. People are hard and unpredictable in so many ways. Yeah. I think that like everything else is very straightforward. It's that side of things. And I think some people go into management because they want to manage people. And that's really not why I went into this. I'm kind of like an inadvertent leader of people. I just wanted to achieve something, and there was an impact I wanted to make, and that management of people has been something that has been necessary as part of it. So I've had to learn as I go, and it's like every single day there's new issues that are people related that throw wrenches into plans, and you've got it. Like that's actually one of the things that you've got to just continue to be mobile and adapt to, is like, what's a group of people going to throw at me today? And in the large picture, hugely supportive, amazing team, but things happen and interactions happen between people that you can't control, and so that is definitely the hardest part.
That's funny. I think we can all relate to that for sure. I think it's just part of being human.
Yeah.
You're the first woman to be on a Fireside chat, so that's awesome for us. And to expand on that, what's been experience as a woman in medical innovation, and any advice for women out there who are looking to start their own businesses or ventures and things like that, coming from a background in medicine? Any advice you impart them?
Yeah, I don't know if it's related to being in medicine. I think I know that as a society, we still have a long way to go in terms of women being in leadership positions and in business and being supported in doing that. And I think the biggest thing is like when you see a woman, or really somebody who is in any sort of potentially marginalized group in any way, shape, or form looking to do something different, is just to support it and make sure that we have as many examples of diversity in those leadership positions as possible, because I think you really can't underestimate how much it means to see people like yourself in roles, and to see that it is possible. And like you kind of create your own echo chamber. So you sometimes I don't really see how much of an issue it is, because like I created my own company, I control who comes into that company, and people are self-selecting for people who actually want to work for a female CEO. So I don't see the people who have an issue with that. And I don't see the people who have an issue with doing business with a company led by a woman. Like I literally don't experience it. But sometimes I have attended events randomly in downtown Calgary, and oil and gas it's so not diverse. And you start to realize, like, I'll go into tech events, and I feel like there's a lot of different people there and you kind of feel immediately comfortable. But I start to realize like how much of a problem it is when you walk into a room and it's all like middle-aged to older white men in business suits, how actually intimidating it is to be in that environment where you feel like there aren't a bunch of people represented. And it feels like this very sort of insular group. So yeah, I think it's very much a problem, but I think the biggest thing is encouraging diversity, supporting it, kind of forcing opportunities like for yourself as I've done, and kind of just going in it and pushing forward and creating those examples.
That's awesome. I think literally what you said about the oil and gas industry and the certain demographic of people in different industries. I remember as an interview with Chamath Palihapitiya, I know we're talking about him, and he kind of said the same thing, you know, in different areas of life, there's only certain groups of people and it can be hard to break through. So sometimes you just got to, you know, be your own example, and then hopefully other people can look up and see, hey, you know, she's CEO of this company, it's possible, and build that network going forward. Totally. I think we got maybe time for one more question here, or one more topic discussion. Then if you got time, Breanne, we can take some questions from the crowd. Sure. That's all right. I had you know, usually end these sessions on a silly or lighthearted note, and I'm glad we had a little bit of time to chat before the event, because the question I had was pretty lame, honestly, compared to what I thought about now, considering we're talking about crypto and things like that. So NFTs or Bitcoin?
Oh,
which one would you pick?
I mean, okay, so in the past week, I've invested in both NFTs and Bitcoin. So
okay.
Yeah, I bought my first NFT today. So from someone I knew.
Okay.
We're just trying to experience the process, but
that's cool.
I guess if I had to choose one, I'd probably say Bitcoin.
Totally, that's awesome. All right, thanks for everyone sending their questions. So I'm just gonna take a moment to go through it. In the meantime, just another question that I had: any specific skills that physicians or residents or medicine should focus on acquiring earlier rather than later, so that it could help them on their building in a company or something like that?
I honestly think the biggest thing is trying to find a network of people who have done it. There's so much that you can learn from people who have gone through the process, who are coming from a similar background. I think creation of opportunities like this, where people can share their stories, is really important. And then as you build a company, if you do decide to do it, and I think the biggest thing is really actually not overthinking it, is like if you have a strong desire to do something and to change the way that healthcare is practiced in some even like sliver of healthcare, to do it. What's the worst thing that can happen, really? Like as with most ventures, you could fail, but the amount of personal development that you actually gain out of it, I think, is really immeasurable. So kind of just, I think, learning as you go and finding people who you can ask questions to and use as sort of a support group along the process, I think, is the biggest thing. All
right. That's actually a fun question. I don't know how I didn't think of this, but how did you come up with the name Orpyx? Where did that come from?
Oh, it's an anagram of the word proxy, because we're using sensor data as a proxy for sensory information from the body. And the domain was available, so that really sealed it.
Oh, that helps.
Yeah.
Yeah, two birds, one stone for sure.
Although it is often read as Orpyx or Orifice, and Orifice Medical Technologies is a very different company.
It's like my name, because it's Anurag, but I've been called Anurag, Anurag, Anurag. It's, yeah, I know how it feels.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kay Wu asks, is it possible to be both an excellent entrepreneur and physician, or would one of those careers have to take a backseat to the other?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I think that I mean, I can't answer that question personally because I haven't done both concurrently. There are some people who have found ways to do it very well. I think Alexandra is a great example, and she's actually on this call right now. So it can be done, but I haven't done it.
Okay. Are you planning on going back to residency at all?
I mean, I've always had an interest in going back. Like I didn't start the company thinking that I want to do this instead of clinical medicine. And so right now, like I still on paper, I'm on a leave of absence for my residency, but I think it's been something where, I've built this thing. It's grown considerably, and I wouldn't step aside from it until I felt that I was able to, and it was on a path where it didn't require my day-to-day attention, and I'm not there.
Totally. Fadi Bodhi asks, do you have any insights on how Canadian medical businesses can expand to the US market efficiently? Sorry.
Oh yeah, great question. So the answer is not hiring a commercial team in Canada. I think that if you want it, wherever you want to commercialize, hire a commercial team in that area, and people that have been there and done that, and sometimes it can be very expensive to do that, but it's very worth having like years and decades of knowledge and not basically paying people to sort of figure it out. They've already got it figured out. They know how to approach the market, and kind of paying for that talent to accelerate that entry.
Gurbind asks, I've heard that the initial hires in a company can break a company before it gets off the ground. Considering this, how did you select the other two people that you decided to start the company with?
Oh, so there are actually 5 co-founders in the company. It just was never, some of them were more founders as advisors, mentors. They were never coming into this as potential employees within the company. I think that hiring people all just so comes down to trusting your gut. And I think it's about asking the right questions to try to understand answers, and then going on a gut feeling if somebody's right and if you can work with them. In any situation, like without a doubt, where I haven't trusted my gut and I've trusted what's written on a resume over the feeling that I get from interviewing someone or working, or even just like going through that process, I've always regretted it. So it really comes down to, do I feel like I can work with them? Am I energized with working with this person? Or is it clear that they're energized by working with me? And it comes down to that. It really comes down to that. Because sometimes people don't, they won't know everything coming into it, but do they have the right personality and drive to think like an owner through the process and trying to find ways to improve things so that it's not always pushed down from the very top? Like you've got everybody innovating within the company.
Awesome. Yeah, creating that culture is super important for sure. Parisa Agahi asks, and this is something that's come up in previous Fireside chats as well, but do you think the MBA education was necessary for your success as an entrepreneur?
No. I mean, I learned a lot in the MBA, but it felt like, I think that if you took a syllabus from an MBA and then just sought out that information online, you could get a long ways there. I think where it really made a difference is that I went into this and I feel like this happens all the time. Like I always feel like a bit of an imposter in situations, and that I don't know enough and I need to figure out more. And I feel like if I hadn't done the MBA, I think I would always sort of self-doubt that I knew enough about business to be running a business. And so it wasn't about even learning anything. It was about kind of having that dedicated focus to cover all of these different domains, to get out of it and think I can do this. I've got it. It was that really, which is totally
Okay.
doesn't require a $60,000 MBA to figure out.
Learn on the job. Fadi Bahodi asked another question. For companies that take a long time to create a functioning product and enter markets, aka many medical companies, do you have any tips on managing and splitting equity with investors and employees?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, so I think that in retrospect, I probably would have gone into this. I think I would have structured the company very differently in terms of equity ownership at the beginning. So I think that if you're founding a company, you should own 100% of that company, and then pull people in as you bring investment in, not divide it up a bunch of ways at the outset. But then I think creating as sizable of an options pool as you can is important. We currently have a 20% options pool. So 20% of our issued and outstanding is options. And we give options to absolutely everybody in the company. There's different levels of options, but everybody gets options. I think that everybody that we hired, no matter where they function within the company, is creating the future of the company. And the success of the company is very much determined by all of those people, not necessarily the investor that brought in the money to drive the company forward. And so I think that it's really critical that everybody has a piece of that bigger potential picture, and they're driving towards that success. And how exactly to divide up an option pool is kind of a constant source of discussion, and how much to leave on the table versus to be giving out at any point in time. I would say general practice is to not actually issue more than 80% of the pool, so you have room. But it really is about making sure that everybody has a piece of it.
Awesome, thanks. I think we'll take one more question. Last one from Corbin, who asks, what does an average day for you at the company look like these days? And how involved are you with R&D?
This year has been crazy because we started this second company. So both companies have doubled in size since the summer. So we've got almost 40 people in Orpyx and 20, doubled in size. Kinetics had 1 employee in June and now has 20. So there's been just a ton of work in terms of like getting those teams in place. And I spent a ton of my time recruiting and setting up the company with the right people. On an R&D side, I mean, we have so much R&D going on. So we have, and like, it's multifaceted. So you've got like data analytics, hardware, firmware, software on both companies. So we function in an agile system for both companies. So I'm in sprints every week for all of those different domains. But then between those sprints, I'm not like heavily involved in R&D. I have my finger on the pulse. I provide my input in those meetings, but then I'm not actively involved between those meetings. There's just like way too much to do outside of it. So I just kind of trust the team to work with it, provide them with whatever direction I think, and then we connect. Like, I'm like in contact with people on an ongoing basis, but it's really through those sprint reviews that I'm part of it.
Awesome. I think that was it for questions. So I think without further ado, that wraps it up. So I want to thank Dr. Breanne Everett. Big shout out for coming on this month's Fireside Chats. Really appreciate it, taking the time out of your busy day. I just want to, I started looking at my phone here because I just want to give a shout out to Orpyx as well, because I believe you just received an award, hey? For Innovation in Diabetic Foot Care Award. And that was within the last week or so. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, the Journal of Wound Care and World Union of Wound Healing Societies just had a once in 4 year gala. So we won actually 2 awards at that for most innovative dressing or device and innovation in diabetic foot care. So it was pretty exciting.
That's awesome.
The team was very excited by that.
Yeah, sweet. So from us at Physician Innovator, big congrats, and we'll be very excited to watch you guys grow, and we'll keep in touch. And thanks for everyone else for joining in and asking really thoughtful questions. I hope you guys tune in for next month's Fireside Chat.